California, 1972. A young boy by the name of Stephen Stainer, 7 years old, was taken from the street. A man that he met along the street had made up a story that he was picking up church donations and wanted to talk to Stephen's mother. He lured Stephen into a car where another man was waiting, and they sped away to a remote cabin where he was held for 7 years. After the 7 years, his abductor was no longer interested in Stephen, and he tried to convince Stephen to lure another boy. It was at that point that Stephen realized that the stories that he had been told that his family had given him up and no longer wanted him were probably not true. He did everything he could not to help his abductor lure another boy. But that happened anyway. Tim White, age 5, was abducted in February of 1980, and Stephen knew that he had to get that boy away. He waited for an opportunity to escape, and he hiked with Timothy 40 miles. Stephen Stainer rescued Timothy White. Their abductor, Kenneth Parnell, died in prison. But he had only received 7 years in prison for the kidnapping of the 2 boys, and he was released in 5 years. And in 2008, he tried to kidnap another boy and purchase him at 4 years old. And he was serving a 25-year sentence for that when he died in prison. Stephen Stainer got married and had children of his own, but tragically he died in a motorcycle accident at the age of 35. Timothy White became a police officer. He had 2 children, and he died of a pulmonary embolism. There is a statue resurrected depicting the rescue that Stephen Stainer had done for Timothy White in their long walk to freedom. This was truly a story of hope. Steve Carter was living in Philadelphia in his 30s, and he knew that he had been adopted at the age of 4 from Honolulu, Hawaii. He didn't really have any other details, and it really didn't concern him until he thought about having children of his own. One day he was scanning articles, and he saw an article about Carolina White. In the article, it stated that Carolina White had discovered that she was a missing person and had never known, but that she had found her own picture on missingchildren.com, and that led to an investigation in finding, in fact, that she had been kidnapped. So, out of curiosity, Steve went to missingchildren.com and began looking at photographs. He was shocked to find an age-enhanced photograph that looked very much like himself. Steve contacted Honolulu, Hawaii Police Department, and they began an investigation. And in the course of that investigation, they asked Steve for a DNA test, and Steve submitted it in 2011. The results of that DNA test proved that Steve was kidnapped. He was kidnapped by his own biological mother and taken to Hawaii and given up for adoption. And then his mother seemingly disappeared after changing her name several times. Steve was 35 years old when he solved his own missing person case. Najira, Nettie, and Nance lived a happy life with a woman she called Mom, Ann Pettyway. But little did she know, back on July 15th, 1987, a little baby by the name of Carolina White, only 19 days old, was taken from a hospital. The baby had spiked a fever, and her young parents took her to the hospital and handed her over to who they thought was a nurse. but it was really Ann Pettyway pretending to be a nurse. She took little Carolina away, 45 miles away. Later they would move again. She treated the baby very well. She raised her as her own. In fact, Nettie, that she likes to call herself, admits that she had a happy life. But it wasn't until she needed her birth certificate for health insurance that she found out that it was a fraud. In fact, she couldn't get any official records. So she started searching. And she found herself on Missing Children's Network. And there she scanned the pictures. And there she found a photograph of herself as a baby. She was 23 years old. She had been missing for 23 years. Through the center, she did DNA testing and found out who she really was, Carolina White. She has been reunited with some of her family. The relationships are strained. Ann Pettyway received a 10 to 12-year sentence for the kidnapping, and in 2021, she was released. Nettie tries to keep that relationship open, but it's still a story of hope. She was found after 23 years. Houston, Texas, 1995. Bianca Lozano, 20 months old, was taken by her father, Juan, when he had unsupervised visitation. He did not return Bianca to her mother, Deanna. Juan was facing domestic violence charges, and he fled to Mexico, where he falsified documents, changed their names, and used false papers. It took 25 years for Bianca to be found by a private investigator. She was found in Cancun, Mexico, in August of 2021. Through the State Department, Mexican officials only charged Juan with false ID and arrested him briefly. During that time, Deanna got to visit with Bianca for a 90-minute visitation in a Mexican police station, where she showed her baby books and tried to talk to her with a translator. Bianca suffers from Stockholm Syndrome and was told that her mother was deceased and died in childbirth. Bianca still remains with her controlling father, even though she is 26 years old. Because of the search for Bianca and the laws that were in Texas, the statute of limitations for the kidnapping of Bianca had run out, and Mexico would not extradite Juan. Deanna fought hard for Bianca's law in Texas that changes what can happen. The new law removes the statute of limitation, and it expands prosecution until a child is 18. This new law that she fought so hard for will take effect September 1, 2023. This goes beyond a mother's hope for finding her child. She has enacted a law which hopefully will prevent other children from being taken from Texas like Bianca. We can all hope and pray that eventually Bianca will reach out to her mother and want to see her after all this long 26 years. This is still a story of hope. If you look up the Missouri Miracle today, you're going to find a completely different story. This is actually a story about a nun who was buried and didn't decompose. That's the subject for a whole nother life. But there was another Missouri Miracle, and it started in October of 2002. A young boy by the name of Sean Hornbeck, 11 years old, was riding his bicycle when a truck hit him from behind. The man in the truck pretended that he was helping Sean and put him into his truck. Sean wouldn't be seen again for 4 years. For 4 long years, his parents never gave up hope. They sold everything that they owned, hired private investigators, and never stopped looking for their son. And then, In 2007, a 13-year-old boy named Ben Owenby was at a bus stop when a white pickup truck pulled up and forced Ben inside the truck. Fortunately, a friend of Ben's saw the incident happen and described the truck perfectly. He said that Ben was crying and upset. The police tracked the truck down to a 41-year-old pizza shop employee by the name of Mike Devlin. When the police arrived at his apartment, they opened the door, and there was Sean Hornbeck and Ben Owenby playing a video game. Ben Owenby had only been missing for 4 days. This was a miracle for both families, because as you might have guessed, a lot of people speculated that these boys would never be seen or heard from again. Mike Devlin received 7 consecutive life sentences, and he would not be eligible for parole until he reaches 100 years old. A story of hope. In 2015, Rudy Farias, age 17, took his 2 dogs for a walk. The 2 dogs returned home, but Rudy did not. Now it's 8 years later, and a Good Samaritan has found Rudy outside of a church and called 911. It's been reported that Rudy is bruised and badly beaten, and he is in the hospital, but he's non-responsive and nonverbal. At the time of his disappearance, his mother said that he was depressed and he suffered from anxiety and PTSD. We don't know what happened to Rudy. All that we know is that his mother's hopes were answered and Rudy has come home. They ask for privacy, please, for this young man and his mother. He's in the hospital, and people are posting photos of him in the hospital online. That's terrible. That's absolutely terrible. Eventually we'll know what happened to Rudy. But right now, we should all pray and be very glad that Rudy has come home. Another sign that there's always hope. Thank you all.